You're listening to Natural Resources University. In this podcast network, our hosts are university researchers and extension specialists, opening your gateway to the science of natural resource management.
Pond University is your one-stop shop for all things pond management. It is hosted by Mitchell Ziske and Megan Gunn from Purdue University and Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. Join us as we talk with biologists, managers, and pond owners about the topics and tools needed to manage your pond for good habitat and great fishing. So grab a notebook and a beverage and sit back and enjoy Pond University. G'day everyone and welcome back to Pond University. I'm one of the co-hosts, Mitch, and I'm joined with Megan. Hi Megan, how are you?
I'm good, Mitch. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny January day here. I'm looking out the window right now. It's still a little cold, but it's nice to see the sunshine. So
I completely agree. I've been missing it. I've been missing it.
yeah. So I think this is the first episode that we've recorded after the holidays. So how was your holidays? Did you have a good holiday break and recharged?
I had an amazing break. I completely checked out of pretty much everything and just relaxed. I went up to my parents one day after quarantining for a long time and then came back and quarantined for a long time. But it was nice to just not do anything and not have to worry about work or responding to emails or anything. It's perfect. How about you?
Yeah, no, we had a good break too. My wife's family are in Atlanta, and so we drove down. We quarantined, and then we drove down to Atlanta and spent. I think we spent almost 2 weeks down there,
Nice.
sort of living in a little bubble down there with them. So that was great. And we have a 1-year-old girl, so it was great for her to get to spend some time with her family. And she's at the stage now where she's running all over the place, pulling the ornaments off the Christmas tree, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. So.
So, Mitch, you are teaching this semester. After having gone through an entire semester of virtual teaching, are you looking forward to this new semester?
I am. I think this is a class that I like to teach because it's a sort of more senior level fish biology ecology class. So we usually get to do some practical stuff and some fish dissections, and we're going to try as hard as we can to keep those this semester, even though there's COVID restrictions. We'll just make sure people are separated, wearing masks, and we're cleaning all the equipment. So I'm looking forward to it. The virtual teaching went really well for me in the fall. I enjoyed it, and I think the students enjoyed what I did. But I think it'll be nice to get back and do a little bit of face-to-face stuff, and hopefully from here on out things just get closer and closer back to being normal. So
Yeah.
yes, what have you got planned for this semester?
I actually have a lot of outreach events. We had to cancel pretty much everything last year because it was in the thick of COVID. But we're changing everything to be virtual experiences. So my student group, the student chapter of environmental education, has a lot of events that they are gearing up for, and I have a lot of events on my own that I'm getting ready to put together and then distribute across wherever, social media and classrooms, and just really looking forward to it.
Great. Actually, that reminded me, there's one project that I'll be working on this year that I'm really excited about that relates a lot to pond management. And, I have a pond management extension program at Purdue. And over the past few years, we've been developing a lot of publications and websites and this podcast. And what we hope to do this year is actually turn it into one of Purdue's signature extension programs. And this is
That's
where...
exciting.
Yeah, we're excited about it. And this is basically where any of the county educators can pick up our signature program and use the materials we built for them and deliver that program in their county. And so, this is exciting. It allows us to take what we do and expand it statewide, and then even hopefully through other states in the Midwest as well. So we're excited about that, and we're really hoping it'll increase the reach of our program and really help a lot of people that have ponds on their properties.
Yeah, that's the goal. Reach as many people as we can.
And of course, we're going to be continuing with this great podcast. We've got a lot of great guests lined up for this year. We're hoping to really just grow the community and And we're definitely going to cover some pond basics still, like fish management and vegetation management. But we really hope to now that we're covering some of these basics, is to dive into some unique topics as well. People do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with their ponds, and people do interesting research on ponds. They have interesting experience and case studies, and so we hope to get those people on and talk about some of these interesting case studies as well.
Yeah, and if you as the listener have something that you want to hear about, let us know. Send us an email, drop us a message on one of the social media avenues, and we are happy to find somebody to talk about it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to today's episode. So we have a pretty exciting guest for today's episode. It's a guest that we actually met through social media. So today we'll be talking with Amie Robison, and she is a pond consultant from Oklahoma, and she's known as the Pond Lady on social media. So if you've ever seen the Pond Lady on Instagram or Facebook, then that's Amie, and she's been working in pond management for a long, long time. They have some unique issues in Oklahoma that we don't see too much here in Indiana, but there are also a lot of similarities in the issues that she deals with. And so she's going to come on today and tell us a little bit about her experiences. She's going to talk about preparing your pond for the spring, and she might tell us a little bit about some of the weird and wonderful things that she does and that she's seen over the years. Essential Pond Terms, the segment where we hope to expand your vocabulary by defining important terms for pond management. One term that I'd like to introduce today is riparian. Riparian is defined as any land that's adjacent to a river, stream, pond, or lake. When people say riparian vegetation, they mean that vegetation such as trees and shrubs that are growing immediately adjacent to the water body. Riparian vegetation is a little bit like the buffer strip or buffer zone that we've mentioned in past episodes. Riparian vegetation is important because it provides shading of the water to allow that water to be cooler in the summertime, and that riparian vegetation also traps a lot of nutrients and sediment that could potentially run into that waterway. Two other terms that I'd like to introduce that relate to this episode are non-native and invasive. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but they are actually a little different. Non-native is a term used to define a species that is found outside of its native range. So this could be a species that's in a new lake that it hasn't been in before. Maybe you have a species that is usually found in the Midwest, but now it's occurring down in the Southeast United States. Or it could be species that have come from other countries. Invasive refers to when a species has established and is starting to cause problems in its new area. So not all non-native species become invasive. Some of them may persist in a new area, but they don't really cause any problems. However, when these new species explode in numbers and start to change ecosystems and entire systems, that's when they become invasive. Examples of invasive fish species include Asian carp, round goby up in the Great Lakes area, and then invasive plants are things like Eurasian milfoil, purple loosestrife, things like that. And then you can also get invasive invertebrates such as the zebra and quagga mussels in the Great Lakes region. Sometimes people will use invasive to describe plants that are native but just become problematic in a waterway. An example of this is coontail. So coontail is a native plant throughout most of the US, but sometimes it creates problems in a water body because it becomes overabundant. Hi Amy, how are you?
I am great. How are you guys today?
We're great.
Happy to have some sunshine.
Oh, so it's okay. See, I was just about to say it's a little cloudy, overcast, rainy today, so it's a good day to be inside recording, and I feel bad if I'm taking you guys away from sunshine, but
well, I can see it out the window right now, so
oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll go lay in the sun later.
Seeing it out the window when it's cold is better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So thanks for coming on the show, Amy. We're super excited to have you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you've been doing over the past 20 years or so?
Well, like Miss Megan, I am an aquatic ecologist. I have been studying, pond, lake ecosystems for over 20 years now, which sort of gives my age away a little bit. But I was in academia at certain points. I have worked for the state, and then through a lot of different sort of things lining up, I found out that there was a huge need for private consultants in Oklahoma to do pond management that weren't just giving you a plan of action, that were boots on the ground with a team that could do the work. And from a scientific perspective, there are a couple other companies that really sort of just sling chemical treatments, and I don't feel like they're a good representation of actual scientific management, ecosystem based management. So I saw a huge need, jump ship from the state side, working for the Department of Wildlife here in Oklahoma. And now I'm completely private. I am my own rogue agent. So it was interesting to listen to your previous episodes and realize that I truly am sort of just I am my own thing. I am the pond lady. I am a private consultant and so much more. I do even have my own electrofishing boat, which is kind of a
That's
big
exciting.
it's a big deal in Oklahoma because I'm one of the few entities that's not affiliated with any other agency or a university that has the potential to use that piece of equipment to actually sample ponds to make management recommendations. So it's good. I have my cowboy mug today because I kind of do feel like the cowboy out here in the Wild West in Oklahoma, which I am an Okie, and things are really different here. So listening to what you guys deal with in Indiana was super enlightening because things are a lot different here, and we can talk about some of this. But yeah, that's just in a nutshell. Even your student you had on, I felt some similarities with him. Grew up like you, Mitch, fishing with my granddad in Oklahoma, and mostly in ponds and farm ponds and small reservoirs, but a lot of pond hopping. So it's my obsession with this stuff started young.
Yeah, great. And I know we've spoken in the past, and it is really interesting to hear some of the challenges that you face out in Oklahoma and how that differs from Indiana and maybe other Midwest states. And you've mentioned to me in the past that you just have a huge number of private ponds out there, right? That are practically not managed at all. And
Well, I heard your statistic. You said some 40,000 in
yeah,
Indiana or
I
so.
think that's about what we estimate in Indiana. Yeah.
And the last number I really got that I can pin to a reputable source that was through the census or NRCS, I can't remember the source, was we had over 300,000 ponds that were at least an acre and a half in size. So that doesn't even account
Wow.
for your smaller ponds, which are way more prevalent than people realize. And their amenities, developers like to build these because they need them for retention or detention purposes anyway, but then they can sell it as a way to say, hey, you've got this fishing pond or this beautification aspect of this neighborhood that they can, hike the price of that property up a little bit. But yeah, that's a huge number. In fact, I think I told Mitch, but we have more shoreline in the state of Oklahoma than any other state in the nation
Wow.
Really?
because of our ponds. Our
Wow.
ponds and reservoirs and all of it's all man-made. You're almost always, the NRCS agent talked about different types of ponds, embankment ponds versus these excavation ponds. And there's a fair mix of both because there are a lot of natural streams and creeks and rivers that have been dammed up because Oklahoma is also 95% privately owned. So you combine those two factors to have a huge percentage of water that's not necessarily being managed by one entity or in a way that's, can be compared across the board as something that is replicable. Everybody's sort of doing their own thing.
Sounds like you'll have no shortage of work out there.
No, and a lot of our ponds are older. Even ponds that are in neighborhoods often were there in existence, usually as agricultural ponds before the development existed. So then when the pond is turned over to the landowners or the neighborhood that is a collective of landowners that manages the pond, they have no idea what it takes to manage even a new pond, let alone a pond that could be potentially 100 years old in some cases. And some of these are, or more. So, when you asked me to come on today and looking at what you guys have recorded already, I was thinking, okay, this would be a good time to talk about spring. Because right now in Oklahoma, it's coming for us right now. I feel it. I see it happening out there. And I don't want to get on my soapbox about climate change, but the smaller systems are often the ones that you see those changes in quicker. So I am definitely, my winter season, my dead season is way shorter than it used to be. So we're already talking about and getting ready for spring in Oklahoma. You guys are a little behind us.
Yeah, but I mean, I see the same things here. Even I've been in Indiana now almost 7 years, and I feel like I've seen some differences. In terms of the amount of ice that ponds get on them around here, and there's the last couple of winters they've hardly iced over at all, and I think that the winter starts later and it ends earlier, and where people maybe used to us preparing for the spring in April, it's definitely seems to be earlier and earlier.
Right. So. Well, in our we usually do our fisheries conference for the state chapter of AFS in February because that's when everybody's available. Nobody's doing field work really. They're gearing up for it, but they're not there yet. And it seems like before these last few years, we were always doing things after that conference. Now we're already kind of boots on the ground doing stuff before that conference even happens.
Wow.
So we're seeing algae blooms.
Wow.
I mean,
in January?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
We've had a lot of snow, which is unusual for the last few years. And it's unusual for it to be this wet this time of year. So the bar ditches are all full and there's algae in them.
Wow.
That's
crazy.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed listening to your previous episodes. There's a lot of great information in there. And I think this is a great way to synthesize all that. But I don't want to necessarily just bore everybody with what to do with spring. Like, I want us to talk about some interesting kind of weird stuff that we find in ponds that, maybe a believe it or not sort of segment.
I think the listeners would love that, and you're very kind to say that the podcast episodes have been interesting and informative so far. But yeah, I think we'd love to get some of your thoughts on preparing ponds for spring, but we'd also love to get some of the stories and experiences that you've had over your 20+ years of working in ponds. So
awesome. Well, let's kind of just launch into a few things. What do we need to do to get ready for spring? Spring is coming for us whether we're ready for it or not,
yes,
right?
It is.
And if you don't plan some of this stuff out ahead of time, you can miss a window. Some of this stuff you only get a few weeks to really make things happen. And especially depending on the region of the country that you're in. Obviously, that has a big impact. Like the first episode, you talk about those abiotic elements, the light and the temperature. Those changes start happening. You really don't have any control over that. But with these changes we're seeing, things are starting to happen earlier. So, habitat, that was a great one for me because it's not only just important to get it in before spawn. To me, it's almost as important to get it in even over the winter before that so that the fish start acclimating to it. So that also... One thing that we didn't launch into with habitat was that these items you sink to use, whether they be artificial or not, they need time to grow biofilms. Those biofilms that support those little tiny food webs that are happening around those habitat structures.
Yeah,
and that's going to happen at a slower rate in the wintertime. So the quicker you can get those in, the more time you have to develop those little communities, and the fish start to get to acclimate that it's there. If you put it in right when they're spawning, you may miss that window. So the sooner the better. Now, and it's good to mention that you can put habitat in any time of year. And unfortunately, here in Oklahoma, we don't get the luxury of the ice to drag the trees out on. We have to do everything by boat, and you are sinking everything. It is labor intensive, but you know it's much more fun to do when it's colder than when it's 100 degrees outside.
Yeah.
And
I can only imagine.
yes. So that was a great one. And I also think it's important to note that you do need and that there's regional variation in what amounts of habitat you might need. So in Oklahoma, most of our ponds are largely just sort of barren bowls for the most part. There's already not enough structure unless you add significant amounts. And what's available sometimes is all landowners can really afford to do anything with. Now, if you can, you want to create different types of habitat, spawning habitat. So if, you got a big barren dirt bowl, you're not going to have necessarily a lot of gravel for spawning beds or even plants that are down there sometimes, especially in cattle ponds. You guys know what I'm talking about, the ones that are just stripped.
Yeah.
There's no riparian, there's no vegetation left, there's nothing down there to protect the fish from each other or predators or anything else.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, and I used to work for the department, so I've known a lot of these guys for longer than I care to admit, sometimes, 15, 20 years. And one of the jokes we used to say for ponds was when it's cedar trees especially, cut as many as you think you're going to need. Then go back and cut 10 times more. Because in Oklahoma ponds, you really cannot go too far with habitat. You really can't. It's usually the limiting factor across the board. If I was to say, what is the limiting factor in Oklahoma ponds? It's habitat, structure.
Okay.
But even if you cannot get gravel in there, which I would prefer to have gravel, some artificial type structures for where you're fishing a lot, and cedar trees, a combination of different types of habitat. But if you can't get that gravel in to create beds, and there isn't a lot of great spawning habitat there, you can still do a lot just with cedar trees. So that's a big one, and getting them in as soon as possible. So that was huge. That was great. And this is one with the NRCS guy, we talked a lot about dams, and maintaining your dam this time of year obviously is a lot easier. So if you wait until things start growing up, it can be hard to tell what you need to cut and what you need to leave.
That's a great point. Yeah.
This time of year is when we're telling our landowners to really do the maintenance and the inspection, because it's also harder to inspect whenever it's all grown up and you can't get back there, you can't see. So dam stuff is a big deal this time of year. Also, clearing your standpipes. If you've got any spillway structure, screens, grates, overflows, you want to make sure that those are ready, because usually you get spring rains, right?
Yeah.
So if your overflow is all plugged up, you have greater risk of causing problems with too much volume. He also talked about the burrowing critters. So I don't know what you guys deal with when it comes to beavers, but in Oklahoma, they're a huge problem.
Okay.
Is it like that there? Do you guys have to deal with beaver control as a major issue, or?
We have some beaver issues, but I would say that I get more calls about muskrats than I do beavers. Muskrats burrowing into dams and embankments and stuff like that. I see a few beavers here and there in some of the neighborhood ponds, and we get a few emails about them, but it's predominantly muskrats are one of the more nuisance animals here in Indiana.
That's good to know. So that's probably way more of a regional thing, because here it is way more beavers. They were they were largely extirpated, reintroduced in the 60s, and have now pretty much set shop at any place they can find. They're not afraid of people. Unfortunately, when you have to remove them, you don't really have the luxury of relocation, because they're so territorial and they're so plentiful here They
And
will.
they're huge.
They're huge. Most people don't realize they're a formidable animal if you're trying to live trap and relocate something that's the size of a bobcat, or larger. So we don't have the luxury of relocation, but the significant damage they can do means that a lot of this time of year is beaver removal. They'll plug up over spillways. They'll plug up
Yeah.
standpipes. Any sort of structures associated with the dam that can be impacted by them. A lot of times it's way more expensive to remediate than just to kill a beaver.
Yeah.
So that's the worst part of my job, but that's a lot of what we do this time of year, unfortunately. So that was a good thing to bring up was the dam,
Yep.
and document. How many times do you guys have to tell people document what you do?
Yeah.
I would think, and in terms of management or things that are not related to management about ponds, one of the biggest problems is people not documenting what they do or making notes about what they see or any way keeping track. So that's a big one, document what you see.
Yeah, and we've been trying to promote a culture, here of really trying to plan and document what you do with your pond management more, and getting people to think about setting their goals, developing a plan for what they want to do, and then documenting fish populations, documenting the herbicides they add, documenting what maintenance stuff that they do, because it's so common that you get emails or phone calls from people and you ask them what they've done in the past and they can't remember or they don't know, and
They have a vague idea, or it's nothing
yeah,
concrete enough for you to be like, okay, well, I guess I can assume this, but I don't know.
yeah,
And the dam stuff, especially everybody's got a camera in their pocket now. You may see a hole in a dam over 6 months, and to you see it all the time. You don't realize how it may have changed. But when you take a photo and you take another photo, you can go back and compare. You can make a lot better assessment of how quickly damage might be occurring. So
Yep.
even just taking photos, I tell people, even if you're not carrying a notebook around like us nerds do with our
yeah,
Right in the rain books, but just taking photos that you can go back and compare to is great. And if you do surveys, usually there are people like us that are going to keep those records for you. So at
Yeah.
least having a consultant that has documentation showing what they've done at least can help too. But documenting
Yep.
everything is great. That was a great point that he made.
Yep.
So we've talked about vegetation a little bit here and there,
yeah,
but it's more been about control versus encouraging
yeah.
vegetation.
Yeah, and it sounds like if in Oklahoma, if a lot of your ponds are these dirt pits, then promoting vegetation growth would be a big part of what you do.
It can be, especially in the urban ponds that are more susceptible to receiving all the nasty runoff from all of this neighborhoods. Those can definitely be a little bit more problematic in terms of, just how you manage them, and getting vegetation in is a lot of times one of the first steps in trying to mitigate what's coming in from the watershed. So this is the time of year where we're planning where we're going to put vegetation, what types we're going to implement, if we're going to do something like a floating wetland. So I don't know if you guys deal with those much. This is relatively new for us, not in terms of the science behind it, but in actually getting people to latch onto it as a management tool, because we do have, most of our areas, the substrate's very clay, soft soil, loam. There are areas of the state, though, where there's a lot more rock, sandstone, sand, where there is a little bit more difficulty in getting the plants established. So those floating wetlands are a great idea. So sourcing materials. So we always like to upcycle if you can. So sourcing materials right now, sourcing plants. A lot of times we try to get neighborhoods that are either close to or in the same watershed as the pond we're managing to donate plants if they have extra plants they want to get rid of, because we've got systems that are right next to each other and one may be overloaded to the point to where we're doing Aquatic Vegetation
Yeah.
Control, and the one directly next to it's been so scoured over mismanagement that they need some of the ponds. And so getting the neighborhoods to collaborate is great. Or
That's a great
and,
idea. Yeah.
and that's another thing too, is it seemed like there was a lot of focus on these private landowners, single landowner ponds. But a lot of the ponds we deal with are neighborhood ponds. So even getting the entire neighborhood to start planting some of these types of things is a huge undertaking, depending on how large the neighborhood is. But so planning for installation of aquatic vegetation this time of year is great, because you sometimes might get a need to make those arrangements with neighborhoods or source the plants you need otherwise, and that's not always super easy. So that's another thing. Also, your buffer strip. So this is the time of year where people are still mowing to the edge, and it makes me want to tear my hair out, because I'm just like, this is when you could be establishing those little buffer strips, letting them grow up a little bit, giving yourself a little bit of that filtration potential through that little, even if it's, we tell people, because I don't know what it is about wanting every pond to look like a golf course pond, and not understanding bank undercut, but, even if you can give me 2 feet, come on, while we're doing restoration, give me 2 feet of grass at the edge. Or this is when we tell people to start modifying their landscaping contracts. So a lot of these neighborhoods have landscaping teams that do all the fertilization, and they're blow and go. They don't care about pond management. They may not have been instructed anything different. They just do what they do, and that's what they've been told to do. They don't see the pond as really anything but a water feature. So they don't understand about mowing to the edge, in my opinion. Now, I'm sure there are different varying degrees of understanding in these teams that come out, but for the most part, this is when we say, okay, get with your landscaping crew. Let them know this is what we're going to change, that they need to not mow down your primrose or your pondweed or your cattails all the way around,
Yeah.
modifying the fertilization, either eliminating fertilization from the contract or reducing it. Hey, give me that buffer strip where you're not putting fertilizer down, or let's go to something organic rather than the inorganic liquid fertilizers. So that's another thing we tell people, because this is when a lot of neighborhoods especially are renewing their landscaping contracts. So make those changes now before you're locked into something that you're going to feel guilty because you're already paying for it, so you don't want to not get that service. So
So you mentioned planting, planting plants, and I often get questions about people looking to plant buffer strips rather than just letting them establish. And so, do you do much planting of emergent plants, and are there plants that you tend to favor over others? That may not become an issue down the road.
absolutely. In fact, that is one of the major things I try to do early on in the urban ponds, especially because for the most part, a problem I've seen over and over is their stormwater inlets will be completely bare. They have, especially if they have a high flow, so they'll be scoured and bare. So we will immediately try to establish plants at every stormwater inlet. And I prefer, and now this is going to vary by region, obviously, but some of the natives that I like are pickerel weed is one of the big ones, because it stays small. So people that are worried about cattails possibly obstructing their view, that one's one that it can get large, but it's not as big as cattails. I like cattails personally. I think they're beautiful. They're relatively easy to train and control compared to some of the others, like lotus, which I love lotus too. But it can get pretty out of control pretty fast. But those are the big ones that we will still try to get at those stormwater inlets, because it's still better to get something going that you may have to go back and possibly train here and there, rather than just leaving it bare and receiving all the sediment and nutrient load, reducing your retention volume, and also increasing the risks for aquatic vegetation becoming invasive and taking over. So those are some of the big ones that I like to do. Now, we do have a big problem in Oklahoma with there not being a lot of I'm not saying that people do it on purpose, but we end up seeing a lot of non-natives that end up in ponds. So
Yeah.
also trying to discourage those and eliminate or control those to the point that they're not going to become invasive or possibly get out of the pond due to connectivity events if they're in a watershed where there is connectivity. But a lot of times there is a certain amount of just education even too involved with the plant stuff of these are the ones that we want to encourage. You didn't mean to do this, but this one's not supposed to be here, so let's try to eliminate that one. But there are some that have become so ubiquitous that it breaks my heart, but I'd almost rather have the non-native that's not invasive as long as it's functioning correctly than nothing. So sometimes if it's already there and I could use it to my advantage, I will. If I can get rid of it, I will try to, or at least control it. With any invasive, we always call it control, not eradication.
Yep.
So, but those are some of the major issues we deal with the plant stuff and having that window. So planning is a good thing because in Oklahoma, we really only have about a 4-week window, and that window is getting earlier and earlier every year. So having the resources ready to go, having all your plants lined up ready to go is super important.
Yeah, I know. I think there might be some people sitting there listening to this going, well, spring's still a long way away. I'm not too worried about things, but I think you raise an excellent point that you've got a pretty short window to be able to implement some of these practices, and before you plan to implement them, you need to source plants, you need to buy chemicals if that's going to be something you do. There are things that you need to do. So, thinking you might be planning to do it, or you might get around to doing these things in early April. But yeah, I think January, February is when you need to be thinking about some of this stuff.
You actually raised you segued perfectly to the opposite. If your pond is on the problem end, the eutrophic end, where there's too many nutrients, and now you have even native plants that have become invasive and taken over. That was something that the woman talking about habitat, she sort of hit on a little bit, but in my opinion, well, it is especially the types that we deal with are really aggressive. Water milfoil, we have the Eurasian and the northern, but we also have coontail. I've heard there's parrot feather out there. I have never seen it, knock on wood, thank goodness, in any of my ponds yet, but coontail is a beast. So we use the sonar, fluoridone, because we want to try to hit it early, scorch it hard, and get long season control. So we can get our, what we want back in there. But this is the time of year where we're asking for people for deposits to get their chemical treatments ordered. So if they're, you only have, just the same as with planting plants, some of those plants, you really only have a short window to get that chemical in there to get the desired effect, so that you are not, and the gentleman, Dave, had made a good point. You don't want to be hitting this over and over again. You don't want to do a chemical treatment incorrectly or at the wrong time and result in less than optimum efficacy to the point to where you have to redo it. And some of these you really only get one shot, because the fluoridone is different than some of the other types of chemicals where you want to hit a full body PPT, PPM, and then it stays there for, up to 30 days. Whereas diquat is it's a contact herbicide or something like copper for algae, which we don't even get me started on that. We don't like copper for algae, but that could be a whole show in itself.
Great, we'll have to get you back then for that.
Well, and this is another thing too, is a lot of what I do right now is teaching people what not to do with chemicals. Because people will see their first flush of a spring bloom of algae and start killing it. And they don't realize that once you start that cycle, you're going to be chasing it all year round, and you're going to create a systemic problem over a long period of time if you do not know what you're doing. So trying to tell people just because your pond's turning green right now doesn't mean we need to go hit it with copper. okay, So that's a big thing that I thought was that Dave brought up too, is like, let's not use more chemicals than we need to. Let's plan. It's always better to be proactive than reactive, like he said, like a couple of these guys have said. Proactive, plan ahead, be ready to go so that you're not constantly chasing a problem throughout the rest of the year.
You mentioned those, the spring algal blooms. Like some of those, those spring blooms are really important to some of the invertebrates and zooplankton and stuff in the ponds. And the phytoplankton really kickstarts the food web, and that first those blooms in the spring are really what drive everything. Really kickstart the pond productivity, and you don't want to be sort of messing with that too much earlier than you need to.
No, they're absolutely essential, and being able to determine the difference between a good algae bloom and a bad algae bloom, isn't truly that difficult if you know what you're looking for. So trying to teach landowners what's good, what is bad, what to kill, what to be okay with is super important, and you don't want to. There was a brief mention of fertilization in ponds that are lacking in nutrients, which here in Oklahoma is just, we have the opposite problem. Almost all of our systems are eutrophic to hypertrophic. And so you get into that game of fertilization and you can have a runaway train real quick. So then that tends to come about when people inadvertently kill a bloom that they really needed, and then they don't have the cycle that they want because they messed up the timing, and then they may have to go back and fertilize, and that, like you said, Mitch, you just really don't want to get into that cycle of fertilization if you can avoid it. You want the system to be as hands off as possible and let it do its thing with what it has. And if you start monkeying around with those nutrient loads, it can, if you don't know what you're doing, even if you do know what you're doing, it can be really difficult. So the only times I would really ever even recommend a fertilization regime is if you have a way to pull the entire pond out and let it dry like you do at a hatchery. Yeah. Other than that, I would say don't monkey around with fertilization. The pond's going to take care of itself. Even in, people, especially with new ponds, think, oh my gosh, it's new, it needs nutrients. And I have to tell people, oh my God, no, you just unlocked so many nutrients when you dug that hole in the ground. You can have the opposite problem with new pond effect and kill your whole pond. So yeah, anyways, that was a really good point. But planning ahead is always better. Having those treatments on hand ready to go is not a bad thing, but knowing when to use them, how to use them.
But I do think too that, you've touched on some things that highlight how important it can be to work with a professional on these issues. I think that, we've been really trying to create this impression that ponds are more complex than most people think. And, talking about the timing of, algal blooms or getting plants put in or applying herbicides, some of that stuff can be pretty complicated, and you can, if you miss it by a few weeks, you can not have the desired effects. You can be wasting a lot of money. And so I think it's really invaluable, working with professionals to get, to help you plan your actions in your pond. Pond Species Profile, the segment where we will showcase the biology and ecology of popular and not so popular pond species.
On this episode, we are going to profile two plant species that are common in ponds, milfoil and coontail. There are many species of milfoil in the U.S., including both native species like northern milfoil and invasive species like Eurasian milfoil. Milfoil are submerged plants characterized by long green stems with feather-like leaves. They are attached to the sediment by roots and grow up towards the surface, often forming dense mats in shallow water. Milfoil are perennial, either staying evergreen or dying back to the root system in the winter, depending on the species and region. In contrast, coontail is a free-floating plant that does not have any roots. Coontail has dark green leaves that form bushy clusters, a bit like Christmas trees. Milfoil and coontail provide important habitat for insects and fishes and can provide food for waterfowl. Both milfoil and coontail can have aggressive growth rates and cause issues in ponds. Controlling these plants requires a strategic and active management plan using a combination of prevention and control.
So I wanted to just switch gears here a little bit. We're getting towards the end of this episode, but I'm sure you've got lots of interesting stories and examples and bad news, good news stories, all sorts of things that you could tell us about. So I just thought if there was one or two that that you think the listeners might find enjoyable or interesting, then I'd love to hear some stories from you.
Okay, I do have a couple of interesting things that I had thought of. So one of the things that's maybe not so good is we have lots of ponds that leak here too, leak or
Okay.
seep.
Yep.
So this is one thing that I wanted to throw out there that I didn't hear our NRCS agent mention. Between bentonites and a liner, you've got two ends of that spectrum. Somewhere in between, there's a product that's called either DB110 or DB220. It's a polymer sealant, which is relatively new in terms of how to get problem ponds to hold water. We've had varying success with it, but that might be something that you could potentially link to in notes to give landowners a different idea. So that's something that is, we're always learning new things. Now that I'm outside of the department, I'm not beholden to any company. I'm completely independent. I can test different things, do my own research. And so finding out about that product was sort of a game changer when you have small interstitial spaces. So I'm using one of your words.
Yeah.
And something like sand that is relatively easy to get that product to go in and it will fill in between those different spaces and sort of create almost like a bed liner effect. So that's a cool product that we didn't know about. But so this is an interesting thing. I don't know if either of you guys saw this. I kind of got a little bit of some notoriety. I always tell people I prefer infamy to fame, but I guess I got a couple minutes of fame. I ended up with an I effing love science shout out about
That's
a
cool.
situation. Okay, so get this. So, being relatively known so far as doing exclusively pond stuff, I have people reach out to me on Twitter a lot because I'm on fish Twitter, and it's a great way to get networking, to network, to get information, to get access to publications. And so I had a biologist from the Nebraska Game and Park Commission reach out to me and say, hey, we found this thing in the sandpit pond. We don't know what it is. Like, can you help us? And it looked like and of course I put it out on the Twitterverse, and I'll have to link you guys to some of those notes so that you can see. But this thing looked like what it looked like to us was an aquatic slime mold, but it was moving as if on its own. And quick tactile movements, not like slow slime mold movements. It looked almost, we had people on Twitterverse say it's a sponge, it's a jellyfish, it's, and I had to say, no, it's not polypodium. We know about polypodium. Polypodium doesn't create aggregates, even in its free swimming stage. A slime mold isn't going to react quickly. This was, like I said, a sandpit pond in Nebraska that was experiencing a fish kill event, but it was linked to turnover, destratification, so it didn't really have anything to do with these organisms. There were some that were free floating, 3 to 6 inches in size, or 3 to 9 inches in its size.
Wow.
Some were attached to decaying fish, some were attached to pieces of leaf or stem. So I heard everything from mycelium to tree roots to, is this some sort of a parasite? Is this a bryozoan? What is this thing? So then they had some biologists go back and got more samples, and when they were looking at it under the scope, they weren't able to find any discernible cellular characteristics, which led them to believe that it was actually, like a bacteria of some kind. But unlike most aquafilms or bacterial oozes and ponds, they'll break up. This thing they could actually pick up with a dip net, and it stayed intact. So nothing is really sort of ringing true to anybody's one guess as to what this creature was. And the videos that it's truly fascinating, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. And getting a shout out in one of my favorite science outlets like that was really awesome. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting story. I'll have to send you the photos because I know when you guys see this thing, you're going to be like, what?
That was
Yeah.
actually how I found out about you, that it was on my Twitter feed all over. And I was like, Mitch, we need to get this lady on our
Really?
podcast. Yeah, it was so cool. Did anybody figure it out? What is
We
it?
still don't
Okay.
know. We still do not know. In fact, I'm going to reach out. So it turned out that the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager from the state of Nebraska reached out to me because he still was stumped. So he had me sort of put the word out to people in Oklahoma. Our aquatic invasive species biologist is a friend of mine. I reached out to him. I know a couple of professors that do invert work because I was like, this has got to be like an invert or like I said, the thing that my husband kept coming up with, and my husband is my business partner in this. So he's the wildlife biologist, I'm the aquatic ecologist. But between the two of us, we've both been doing this a long time, and we really think it's a combination of it being an aquatic slime mold event due to the excess nutrient load happening during the fish kill, and that it was actually not necessarily moving on its own, that it was hydrophobic sort of action going on when they would try to touch it and it would just move. Or wind or things picking at it from underneath that were actually causing it to move, things that were eating on it. So that's really our best guess. But I'm wanting to reach out to Nathan again and to Chris, and I can give you guys his information too if anybody has any ideas and wants to reach out to him. I see if they've come up with a definitive answer, but as far as I knew, they're still stumped. And I just said, I have to know, because what if it is some kind of non-native species that could end up in Nebraska's not super far from Oklahoma. Is this going to end up in my ponds? And we have a lot of sandpit ponds that, people find. I mean, we've had all kinds of weird stuff in sandpit ponds, but
Yeah.
that was a new one. That was a new one. So that's really cool, Megan, that you saw that, because that was my brief period of fame. So
It was insane
Yeah.
to watch it just move around. Yeah, that was.
well, and I even got more videos after that are more clear, and you can hear this female biologist go, "Look, see, it's moving," and I was just like, "This is too weird. This is." So my buddy that I do a podcast with was like, "Okay, is this like an alien? It is 2020. This is an alien. Like, next thing his tweet is just gonna be and we don't hear from him again."
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was some sort of year, right? So I think, if there was aliens, or maybe it's something for the Ghostbusters to figure out, I think, why not in 2020?
Yep.
I mean, if they can catch it, I don't know.
I mean, we could talk to you for hours, and I think, and the great thing about that is we'll just have to get you back again. And
That sounds fantastic. I would love that.
But no, it's been great chatting with you and learning about some of the stuff that you do in Oklahoma, some of the issues you see there. You gave us a great toolbox of things to think about in terms of preparing ponds for spring. And then it was really cool getting to hear about some of those unique scenarios. And I can't wait to check out some of those videos of these killer slime that's creeping across the lake across the pond to come and get us all. So
The creepy crawly bryozoans from deep beneath the sandpit pond in Nebraska. Yes.
yeah.
It came from the Nebraska sandpit pond.
Yeah. But before we sign off, one thing we like to get our guests to do is to see if they have any recommendations for our listeners in terms of books or other podcasts or anything that our listeners might find useful or interesting.
I actually took a moment to write some down, so I have to plug, of course, the podcast that I'm a regular contributor on. We have a section called Pond Talk on the Fish Nerds podcast.
Okay.
You can find that at fishnerdspodcast.com, or on Twitter we are at Fish Nerds, or on Instagram at Fish Nerd Nation. Also, I've been lucky enough to be a guest on the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. And that was a great time speaking with Angie Scott, and she is thewomanangler.com or at thewomanangler on Twitter. And then I have to plug one, which is just basically a blatant attempt at me trying to get a guest spot on their show, which is the Ologies podcast, and you can find them on Twitter or on IG at Ologies, Ologies. That is Allie Ward. And then I picked up with a Barnes & Noble gift card for Christmas, which I always love getting gift cards, but I picked up a copy of the Why Fish Don't Exist book, which is by the NPR journalist Lulu Miller. I haven't started it yet, but the fish nerds that I do my podcast with, they have a book club, and they've read this one, and they actually scored an interview with her. And so that's one that I've been wanting to read that I'm really excited about getting started on. So
Great. Well, that sounds like it definitely broadened my horizons. I'm going to check out some of those things, and we'll provide all those links in our show notes so that our listeners can find those podcasts and find that book.
great. Awesome. Well, and if there's anything else that you need from me, you guys let me know, and I can't wait to be on again.
Thanks, Amie.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure we link to your social media pages, and we'll link to your company's website and stuff like that too. So people will be able to contact you if they have questions.
That would be awesome. I'd love for everybody to find me on social media, and I really appreciate you guys having me on. This has been great.
Great. Well, thanks a lot again, Amie. It's been great having you on, and I'm sure we'll chat again to you soon.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Megan, and you guys have a good day and stay warm.
Thanks, Amie.
Thanks. You too. So that was a great episode. Megan, what did you take away from it?
That there's so many different processes and so many different techniques that you probably need to use in your pond, but you don't have to do it on your own. There are these experts that are out there that you can reach out to from the beginning planning stages to you have this pond that you inherited, or just the resources are out there. You don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think building on that, it's important to do your homework. I think you can. There are lots of resources. There are extension agents. There are state offices you can go and visit. There are private consultants and professionals and biologists. And I think getting as much information from those people as you can to know what your options are and to see what might work best in your scenario. So do your homework, and I think. If you haven't done much pond management, up till now, or things are not going great in your pond, then you should. Doing anything should be able to help your situation. But I think take your time, plan things out, do your homework, and develop a strong plan. And in a couple of years, you should be able to start to restore your pond and really see some positive benefits.
Yeah, and second opinions are okay. I mean, we do that with the doctor, right? If we hear a price or something, or hear a diagnosis that we don't exactly resonate with, you go and you ask for a second opinion. So you can do that with your ponds.
Yeah, and I think if you're meeting with some of these companies, I think it's also very valuable to get references from them and to speak to people that have used their services, and if you can, maybe even go and see their ponds and really know what you're getting into before you commit your hard-earned money to some of these companies. So
yeah. Awesome.
Great. Well, as always, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. We're really trucking along nicely now. We're continuing to find interesting content to bring to you, and make sure you like this episode. Share it with your friends. Let other people know about this. And if you have questions or ideas, please connect with us, and we're happy to make your ideas into an episode here down the road.
And if you're interested in other topics, we are part of a Natural Resource University network. You can learn about fire, you can learn about habitat, and you can learn about deer.
Until next time, everyone, I'll see you later.
Bye.
Cheerio. Pond University is hosted by Purdue University and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. Pond University is part of the podcast network Natural Resources University, which is supported by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you liked Pond University, then check out the other podcasts in the Natural Resources University podcast network. Purdue University and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant are equal opportunity, equal access, and affirmative action institutions.
Natural Resources University is funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. New episodes are released every Tuesday. For more information, follow us on our social media platforms at NR_University.